You asked some really good questions that I've been answering. I've been talking to a bunch of press like the last couple of weeks, and your questions have been really fun because they're just totally different. I didn't expect some of these questions, so I had to think.
Hi, I'm Dax, and this is What's Under the Bed, where I interview filmmakers, actors, and guests about horror movies. In this episode, I interview horror director BJ McDonnell. We talk about 80s horror, life in a punk rock band, and his new movie, Studio 666. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell to know when a new episode drops. If there's someone you think I should interview, please let me know in the comments. Now, enjoy my talk with horror filmmaker BJ McDonnell. Would you like to start?
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Awesome. So it is amazing to talk with you, and so I'm gonna talk for the audience. You are a filmmaker, a director, as well as a longtime cameraman and Steadicam operator. For more than 100 movies, you've worked with some of Hollywood's biggest directors, and since we focus on horror here, can I list off some of your credits in that genre?
Yeah, go for it.
You were camera operator on 5 movies with Rob Zombie, including Devil's Rejects and both Halloweens. You were part of several films in the Conjuring series, including Conjuring 3, both Annabelle sequels, and The Nun. And I hear you have a remake of Salem's Lot coming out.
We do. It's going to be rad.
It's going to be
awesome.
Yeah. You were director on the Repentless Trilogy for the metal band Slayer, and you worked on the insanely fun Hatchet series and directed its 3rd installment, Hatchet 3, with 2 of my favorite actors, Kane Hodder and Danielle Harris.
I thought you were going to say Derek Mears.
Now, your movie Studio 666 drops this month. It's a mix of genres. It has comedy, rock, and horror, and it stars the Foo Fighters and has you directing. Can you tell us what it's about?
Not going into too much detail, but it's basically if a band's going to go find this place to record that has a very cool sound in a house, then they want to find something that's very unique. So they end up talking to basically their manager, and he basically gets them into a house that has some folklore behind it of a band from the 90s that some things didn't work out so hot for them. So they end up going to the house, and when they get there, they hear the sound in the room. It's awesome. And they start trying to record, and then bad things start happening without me saying much, but that's where you go. That's what happens, especially when you're a band in a spooky house.
Yeah. You played bass guitar in a punk band called 57 Licks before becoming a filmmaker. So Hatchet 3, it has a great soundtrack. Your work with Slayer and now Studio 666 with Foo Fighters, how big a role has music played in your experience?
The thing is, before I did films, my grandfather was an old actor who used to take me as a kid to sets, and that's kind of what started my love of filmmaking. Just going from where I kind of came from. Me and my buddies would make home movies, make some cool action movies, run around the backyard with the VHS camera, just doing all sorts of stupid stuff, ketchup, blood, chocolate syrup, and just blowing things up when we could. After I got into the music scene, in a really young age, I was always a metalhead kid growing up when I was really young. And then I kind of during the early 90s, punk rock kind of had a revival. And so I got really heavy into punk rock, and that's what I got into the band. So I toured for about 7 years with these guys going all over the US. And then as things have it, band members sometimes just don't get along after the long haul and call it quits. So I decided to move back to LA or move to LA and, go to film school and see if I could get into a career of making movies, since I loved doing that so much as a kid. Music to me, going into the whole music thing, when I'm writing stuff or I'm trying to get an idea in my head about what a movie is I want to do, I listen to a lot of film scores actually. And I also listen to a lot of heavy metal. It just depends on the tone of what the idea is that you're trying to do, like what's in your head at that point. Like if I'm trying to think of something really big and theatrical, I usually tend to go to more like Hans Zimmer type scores, John Williams, that kind of stuff. If it's going into like, say, the Slayer realm or something that's like I think is going to be totally insane and crazy, and I want to have that vibe, then metal always goes hand in hand with that. I love going into that realm and really pumping myself up that way. It just gets me in the mode of like, puts my mind in the mindset of what I'm trying to write and accomplish. But also in these movies and these things, knowing how, back to your question, how, I know how the music business works. I know what instruments are what. I know like the names of all, the drum heads and the cymbals and I've been on tour a bunch. So I think when you're dealing with bands and you're doing stuff with bands, you can relate more to them. And you can have more to talk about because you actually have been in that world a little bit. Maybe not as successful, but you at least have something to talk about. And you get the idea of what it takes to make a record or how they do it.
So your band performed in Pensacola, Florida, where you grew up. Mm-hmm. Were you born in Florida?
No, I was born in Van Nuys, California. And I was here with my family until I was about 5 years old. And then my dad got a job in Pensacola at the naval base doing civil service down there. He would make like, screws for like, Apollo missions and Apache helicopters and stuff like that. And so we relocated down there where my grandmother's family is also from. And I basically grew up in that, from like age 5 to 24. Basically, I was in Florida, but I toured a lot around the US in my late teens. So I started getting a little bit more world renowned of like what was out there, and I'd also go to like, as a young kid, I'd fly to California and stay with my grandparents and like, go to film sets or go see movies. And they had a huge influence on me.
So I have a question. May I show you something I have from Foo Fighters?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
My dad and my mother got this years ago, and it's the band, and they all signed it. We also have Gus. Yeah, Gus. Yeah.
That's so funny. I saw that Gus. Yeah, we can talk about Gus all day. He's an old friend of mine.
Well, that was actually my next question. Did your paths ever cross?
Funny. Well, yeah, no, that's the funny thing about how all this was. So my old punk band in Pensacola, Florida, Gus basically was in charge of booking all these shows in Pensacola. He would bring the bands in. This is like before the Foo Fighters stuff and before Nine Inch Nails tour management that he did and any of those kind of things. So in order to find opening local acts, there was only a few punk bands in Pensacola. It was Lick 57, my band. There was Blunt. There was a band called Jim Crack, another band called Wooden Horses, a couple other ones, but those were the main ones. So Gus always would be like, he'd kind of pair our bands up to be the opening acts of all these bands from out of town, like to be the opening acts. So I knew Gus when I was a teenager. And he was always like helping our band out, hey, Sam I Am's coming. You guys want to open up for them? Yeah, that'd be awesome. We opened up for like Pennywise and, we opened up for The Offspring and AFI and Swingin' Utters. And I mean, I can name all these bands that he brought into town, Lagwagon. And so it was funny because he was the main dude. And then, after a while, like, he took off, started doing tour managing with the Foo Fighters. And, we were all excited for him and didn't see him for the longest time. And then I moved to California, started working in the film business. And every now and then I'd see Gus like at shows. Like I'd go see a band play out here in LA and I'd be like, oh my God, Gus, what's up? So I'd see him every now and then. And then it's funny because then this whole Foo Fighters thing came up and, he came to the set and we were, it's such a small world, that's like 20 something years or more of like knowing Gus Brandt. And he's a great guy. He's always been so nice and so great and always believed in us,
Well, speaking of how the Studio 666 happened, how did this project come out to be?
So there's two producers that work with Dave all the time, Jim Rhoda and John Ramsey, and they did Sound City, Sonic Highways. They usually do a lot of Dave's stuff, and the Foo Fighters stuff. They do the music videos or anything that's kind of visual, audio visual with Dave. They kind of put it together and work with him on it. I was working with them on a pitch for another movie for a while. It just never kind of, came to fruition. And and Jim Rhoda called me and said, "Hey, Dave has this idea. He wants to do a horror film. He doesn't want to direct it. He wants to find a horror director. So what if I send you the pitch and you read it and tell us what you think?" So I was like, "Yeah, man, that'd be awesome." So he sent me the pitch. I read what Dave wanted to do, and then I kind of got on my computer and I started making a lookbook of things that I thought would be really interesting to add to the movie. In the script, I thought would add a little bit more depth into what he wanted to do and just a little bit more like intense, subject in what he wants to do. So I did this lookbook, ended up getting a meeting with Dave, went over to the house where they were recording Medicine at Midnight, where we actually shot the movie, set down the lookbook. We went through the things. We talked about, directors he likes, movies he likes, things that I like, directors I like, and also talking, then we started talking about the vibe of what we wanted to go for, how we wanted this film to feel. And, from then on, we just really vibed and got along really well and really enjoyed each other's ideas. And that was it. I got hired right there, and we went into pre-pro and away we went, started gathering all the troops.
So how was your approach different directing actors in movies like Hatchet 3 versus directing like Foo Fighters in Studio 666?
Well, Hatchet 3, I had, like actors, I had that's what they do. That's all they do. In Studio 66, I had more musicians. So there's a big difference there. The good thing about 666 is that I also have a mix of professional actors in the movie too. So, with something like Hatchet, I didn't have to worry about like the continuity of things for the most part, because they're actors. They know like, oh, if I have this gun in my right hand, it's always got to be in my right hand, can't be here. Like continuity and hitting their marks and doing that kind of stuff. So I had to kind of do a different approach with Studio 666. And it was almost like kind of in the first couple of weeks, like, showing the guys like, oh, no, you have to keep this in this hand because it won't match if we go to editing, or, you have to hit that mark, or it's because it doesn't work. And we kind of had to do like a little bit of a trial thing there. And so I let the guys play themselves in Studio 666. I didn't tell them like to try to build a character really, because they're playing themselves. So who plays a better character than yourself, And so I think that also eased down like any anxiety of actually having to speak and do dialogue and like perform, is the fact that they could be themselves and really have fun with it. And that's kind of how I approach that.
Well, going back to your grandfather, he was an actor in film and television, and he did encourage you to become a filmmaker, as you said.
Yeah.
He was also the father in the horror movie Invaders from Mars.
He was.
And were your parents excited when you began working in film?
They were very excited. I think my mom was a little worried about it because she always wanted me to be like a doctor or a fireman or something like that. It just wasn't the path I really wanted to do. And when you're really young, you sometimes go, I don't know, like I know my grandfather did this professionally, but like how hard is it to get in the film business? Because at the time that I was thinking about going into it, it's always nice when you have a family member that's in it that can introduce you. But by the time I was going to get into films, my grandfather he's already been passed away and long gone. So just being a young kid was very influential with him. My grandmother was really the one that pushed me to do it, because she's the one that was like, we made a great living off of this, and it is something you can achieve. Because I just didn't know, when the band stuff didn't really work out, I didn't know what my path was going to be. When you're young, you're just like, I don't know what to do. I just don't want to be a bum. So I ended up talking to my grandmother, and she encouraged me to move from Pensacola, Florida, and come out to Los Angeles. And I ended up I didn't know where to start. So I ended up going to Los Angeles City College because I had no money, and that was the cheapest thing. I couldn't afford USC or UCLA or AFI or any of these really big, universities. I'm broke. And so Los Angeles City College provided me, basically, once I became a resident of California, it was like $11 a unit, and each class is like 3 units. So whatever, that was easy. So I ended up doing that. And, I graduated film school, probably didn't need to go to film school. That's a whole nother topic, because I'd gotten more education out of being on set. But my grandmother was more influential, but my parents were very happy with the route that I took once they realized that I was doing stuff, and it wasn't just, I'm going to go work in movies, and then I move out here and just end up like living, working someplace like in a restaurant or a gas station.
So you talked about how as a kid you'd make little horror movies. Do any of them still exist?
Man, I wish. They're so bad. They're so horrible. And if I could find those, I would love it. I think they all got wiped out. Honestly, when I moved from Pensacola, we had so many hurricanes come through the property that my grandmother still had. And I think it wiped out all my VHS movies that were just, it's a bummer because they were really funny. But it's also one of those things where you're like, I hope no one ever sees those because they're so ridiculous and, so cheesy. But, we were kids. So we were just having a good time. It'd be cool. I would personally like to see the stupid stuff that we did because it was really just so silly. More nostalgic for me.
So before all that, before you found horror movies, what do you remember being afraid of the most? Like,
Jeez. I think for me, more things that were scary was because I'm a surfer and Jaws scared me to death, honestly. And just knowing that is something that could really happen, like the sharks and things. I remember watching Jaws one time before I actually went out surfing. And the whole time all I could think of was this, where is it? Where's that thing? Is he going to pop up and get me? Those are the things. I think the real things are what scare me the most. I enjoy like the comedy of like a Nightmare on Elm Street or like the Michael Myers things, where they're just the others, Freddy Krueger's like this crazy, scary thing that gets you in your dreams, and he was like, for me, he was top of my list of the kind of like monsters that in those movies that I loved him more than like Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers or whatever. But I think the things that scared me the most are things that like could really happen. I mean, honestly, like when I watched The Strangers, that scared the crap out of me because, especially when they're like, why are you doing this? And they're like, because we can, or because, it's just like so scary.
I believe they said because you answered the door.
It was something like that. I remember that. I just got chills thinking about it. I was like, ooh, because that's like such a simple, scary little thing. And, and it's funny because wherever they filmed that, it felt like Florida to me, like with the like the street lamps and like how there were trees around and like kind of the houses were like kind of like Florida style houses. So for me, like seeing stuff like that, I was like, oh God, that could really happen. So I just got to make sure I look through the peephole of my door before I answer anything. Those are the things that scare me more, not so much the monsters or things like that. It's the reality. It's the real world.
So kids are normally first introduced through fairy tales like Little Red Riding Hood or Billy Goat's Gruff. These stories would scare and excite the kids. Did you have a favorite story that scared you?
My favorite story was definitely Sleepy Hollow, the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And that one really, I just love the whole headless horseman thing and the Ichabod Crane and just the kind of like, I remember having like a little book of the story, and I remember the imagery being like kind of like very scary to me, but I was also like very drawn to it. That's why I loved whenever Tim Burton did actually the movie, because I just love his vision of Sleepy Hollow. I thought it was super cool, like just the visuals that he had at that time, like doing that. So me growing up, Sleepy Hollow for me was one of my favorite scary books. I thought it was just such a cool tale.
So speaking of kids being drawn to the stories, why do you think kids are drawn to scary stories?
I think kids love the excitement. I think, we watch comedies because we love to laugh. We watch scary movies because it's almost like an amusement park ride. It's like the roller coaster ride, the ups and downs, the getting nervous, the like, grabbing onto your friends and screaming when the scares happen and just having the excitement of that. I think that's what draws kids to horror films. I know when I was a kid, that's what I loved. Me inviting my buddies over, and back then we would go rent like Blockbuster movies, and we'd only rent the movie because it had a VHS cover of like Evil Dead, like with the skull and the eyes looking at you, the Evil Dead 2, and just like not knowing what you're getting into because we didn't read about movies or things like that. We just would get it because it had cool cover art, and we'd watch the movies, and we were like, either jumping for joy and scared or being like, oh, that was cheesy, So that's what back when I was a kid, that's what made me happy about those things. That's what I enjoyed.
Well, were there any like children's movies that were unintentionally scary, like the Flying Monkeys from Wizard of Oz kind of thing for you?
For me, not really, because I'll tell you, my family, I think, because they didn't really monitor what me and my sister watched when we were kids. When I was in kindergarten, I saw Escape from New York, which a kid in kindergarten should never see a movie like that. And actually it had a huge impact on me. And I, even down to the music, I would walk around like Snake Plissken with that tune in my head, thinking I was all cool. You know, I'm this little kid, you know, going to the jungle gyms and like, I'm Snake Plissken, you know, like I'm awesome. That's kind of like the weirdest thing. And then I ended up like, HBO would come on at late at night. My parents would kind of like go see their friends, and we'd have a babysitter, or we'd just watch each other, and we'd watch HBO. We'd see all these like scary movies that would come on after dark, and you know, it kind of that was the thing that just, you know, we loved doing that. It was weird. So I didn't get much. I think I'm rambling totally off the subject of what you just asked me, but that was kind of how we ended up growing up and watching scary movies.
So speaking of that, what age do you think it's all right for kids to be introduced to horror?
Nowadays, I think it depends on what horror film you see, because there's so many different types. So for me, like the Nightmare on Elm Streets, maybe that's not a good example. Like Halloween, you know, it's a lot of suspense in those movies, and it's a lot of, you know, like Michael Myers walking and then the kills happen. I think it just really depends on subject matter. But I think if it's really inappropriate stuff that's like very serious, or like graphic nudity kind of things, that it just depends on the level of what the horror film really is. I think that really, you know, details like what age you should see stuff. And also every kid has a, you know, or teenager, they have their own, you know, views on what they see. Some things affect people more than the other person. For me, I loved it. I loved blood and gore, and I thought it was cool. But say my friend who, you know, and I went to a Christian school, which is really weird for me being a, you know, horror fan. But I would invite kids over from the school to like stay the night, and we would. I'd be like, "Oh, we're gonna watch this movie. It's so cool." And to me, it was normal, but to them, they'd go home and tell their mom that we watched something like The Gate, you know, that had like all these demons and stuff. And then I would get a call, or my mom would get a call and be like, "Why'd your son let our kid watch this movie?" I think it just depends also on the kid, like how much they can take of a scary film, or if they can't, because, you know, that's a huge factor. But age wise, I'll say it, like I was in kindergarten, I saw Escape from New York, and I saw Cujo and all these movies, and I think I turned out okay. I mean, I hope I did. maybe it made me weird, but I think I turned out all right. And I was probably, God, I don't even know how old I was, maybe 7.
Well, speaking of cable TV, that must have been like the first time 80s kids saw horror movies. Like
Mhm.
they would have watched Dawn of the Dead not knowing what a zombie was. And now kids, before they can even talk, are going on zombie walks with their parents.
Kids
Do
love
you
zombies, yeah.
yeah, do you think the limited access made these movies scarier in the 80s, and too much access makes them less scary now?
That's a good point. You know, it's weird. I was just talking to some friends about this. I remember back in the 80s when I knew usually what kind of movies were coming, like the theatrical ones. You knew what movies were going to come out each month, you know. Nowadays, I can't keep up with what's coming out because there's so many streaming services that put out their own movies, and I'll get a phone call, you know, from a buddy and be like, "Hey, did you see this movie on Netflix? Blah blah." I'm like, "I never even heard of this movie, so I'll check it out." It's, you know, we back in the 80s, I think we had more of a grasp on what kind of films were happening, what kind of horror films, and now it's just everyone's so flooded that maybe you're right. Maybe, you know, we have so many Walking Dead episodes that you've seen so many zombies get blown up in different ways that people become kind of numb to it in a weird way. So it's kind of fun, strangely enough, even though you're seeing it's still a human getting blown up or heads cut off and things. But I guess that's okay because they're zombies. But if you see a human get that, it's gnarly. I mean, like a non-zombified human, you know?
Well, so something I want to explore with this show is how horror movies affect people my age. Kids deal
Yeah.
with serious issues with like bullies, COVID, and active shooter drills. And
Right.
do you think horror adds stress, makes no difference, or could it even help them with these things?
Again, I think that goes to the person that's watching it, because then it comes to mental state also of I think certain people. You look at the school shootings, and people watch The Matrix and they think that was cool, you know, so they end up going in with guns and trench coats. And I mean, and it's just like that affected them that way. Where some, you know, like people like probably you and I at that age would be like, well, that's, you know, unacceptable. That's not cool. Um, That's a hard one to answer because I don't know if horror really. I think that maybe it's an outlet for some people to watch and they like to see what's going on, but some people might take it the wrong way. Again, it's a weird world we live in now, and who knows? Like, it just depends on the person, in my opinion, and where they, mentally are, and that's the scary thing. That's a horror film in itself, you know.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that that the cover art for VHS was a huge thing for you guys, and
Yeah.
you mentioned that Evil Dead 2 was a big thing for you. Why was that so important to you? Why was that? Uh,
For us, and it was us seeing something that was going to be fun. If we saw some kind of interesting art, we wanted to see more about what that was. Everybody, like, look at the poster behind you of The Thing. If you didn't go into that, you'd be like, what is that? That looks cool. Even the font looks really cool. Creep Show. I mean, look at, the creeper right there, like taking your ticket. I mean, it was those kind of things where you see that and go, oh, I want to know what that's all about. I think that's really cool. And we kind of based our whole, like, watching what movies were what from cover art. And I'll tell you, there were things that we probably saw we probably shouldn't have rented and probably shouldn't have seen, at the age that we were. But there was a lot of things that we enjoyed and it kind of shaped us, like Toxic Avenger and, Class of Nukem High, which are just absolutely absurd. But we, as kids, we all got a kick out of it and thought it was hilarious because it is so silly. And the box cover art for that, you're like, look at this guy, he's all burnt up with a mop. What's this thing? So I think the cover art made it like just more of a fun experience for us, not knowing what we were getting into. And we really couldn't read about much. We didn't have it, like, if you didn't read Fangoria magazine and kind of like not keep up with what was coming out, you didn't know what it was. You just looked at the image and said, I got to check this out.
so as a director, do you have any input on the artwork used for your films?
You know, I think certain directors get certain things, in contracts. For me, like, I sometimes get approval or I get to look at things and I can give a note. But usually once you're done directing something and say a studio takes it or whatever, there's a whole team that kind of like assesses what's going to be best for it. And it's kind of out of your hands at that point. And if they're cool, they'll let you see, like, the poster and say, what do you think of this? Do you like this font? Is there anything you want to change? It's like the Studio 666 poster went through a couple different versions of that. And so there were certain things that I didn't want to show too much in there. And all I can do is say, I think we should pull back on this a little bit so it's a little more mysterious, or do this or that. And then, you kind of cross your fingers and hope, okay, they're going to listen to me or they're not going to listen to me. It just depends, because the PR team is the ones that are going to put it out and they just want to, they want to sell it. So they're really going to, even the trailer, like, I can see a trailer that we do and I can say, hey, I like this, but maybe pull back a little bit on this. And then honestly, it really depends on what they want to do. So, the power, I think Christopher Nolan or like James Wan's and people like that, I think get more of the ability to say so in trailers and posters and things like that. But for me, it's like, I directed the movie. I hope everybody likes it. And then, they'll show me some things and I hope they show or don't show certain things in the poster or the trailer, and you cross your fingers at that point. All you want to do is make sure people go see the movie and it's fun. Like, even the Hatchet poster, I had no say so in that. That just showed up one day. It's like, oh, that's cool.
So speaking of the Hatchet franchise, let's talk about it.
Okay.
I love these movies so much, and yours was my favorite. It was funny, it had great kills, and it looks phenomenal. Adam Green created the franchise and directed the first two movies, and the fourth one, Victor Crowley. You directed the third. What are the challenges of stepping in to direct a movie in someone else's franchise?
The hardest part is you have to kind of try to keep going with the flow of, like, kind of the story of, like, or like the vibe of what the movie is, because you can't just take, like, so like Adam's movies are pretty silly, and you can't just go, all right, well, I'm going to jump in here, I'm going to make this thing dead serious. You can't really do that because people already they already know what they're going to kind of get into. It's going to be cheesy 80s horror fun. And if I tried to, like, jump in and make Victor Crowley, like, absolutely horrifying and, like, deadpan serious, people are going to be pissed. Or they're going to love it. I don't know. But, like, you kind of have to go with the flows to try to keep it in the same vibe, the same tone of what the original ones were going for, because that's why they're there. That's the hardest part of it. Because honestly, I did want to take Hatchet 3 even darker. I wanted to make it scarier. But you know, at that point, there's only so much you can do when you're stepping in to direct a number three of a series of films. So that's the hardest part, I think, is like changing things.
What are things you can do to stay true to the story but still make it your own?
For me, there's imagery in Hatchet 3, I think, is what I made it different. I changed the aspect ratio. I made it more cinematic. I changed the whole, like, the lenses. Everything was from Panavision. The lenses were Panavision. We shot 240. It was a Red 1, which is the old digital camera now, like back when digital cameras were first kind of like getting their kicks, which I still think it looks pretty cool for what it is. There's a lot of shots of Victor Crowley that I think are scarier in this one, and we wanted to like use a lot of firelight and use a lot of shadows. I didn't want him to be like always exposed and like brightly lit and like rah, like running. Like, I wanted to try to keep him kind of, in more of a contrasty, dark, shadowy kind of feel, and not so like right in your face, brightly lit. I mean, sometimes you can't always get that because the fire's like lighting him up all the way, but I wanted him to look a little bit scarier. I wanted him to feel scarier because I didn't think we accomplished that in Hatchet 2. I thought Hatchet 2, he was just right there, and it was kind of like, I wanted to make it a little bit more darker in that, and I wanted it more cinematic. And so that's what I did to change the Hatchet, series. I took my camera operator skills and framing and made it more, cinematic, in my opinion.
So Hatchet 3 has Derek Mears and Kane Hodder, both actors, play Jason from Friday the 13th, and you had them square off in Hatchet 3. How did that come about?
Just one of those things, because the Hatchet series became a whole like who's who of horror, kind of like who can we get to be in this movie. And, I guess fans have always wanted to see like Jason, Voorhees, you wanted to see kind of the both of like the old and the new kind of come together and have a battle, so we figured that would be the best way to do it, was actually have them, get Kane and Derek and put those two together. And the best is also because Derek's so funny. Like, he actually, because he plays a lot of monsters and a lot of characters like that, but like letting Derek just be in there and be a comedic relief was a lot of fun too, because he's not in monster makeup. He's playing, he's Derek, he's playing his character, and we got to really have fun with that. So it was cool, like actually squaring those two off, but it was all premeditated. Like, we're going to do this because all the other films had, older horror actors involved.
So if a kid is interested in horror movies, what's a good movie to start with?
Ooh. And when you say kid, what age are you saying? Like
my 14? Age, 14, 13 to 14.
13 to 14, geez. Because like I said, I came out right off the bat like John Carpenter style. For me, like the old school stuff, I think is very cool. Like going with the John Carpenter movies, go with like, Halloween, because it's very cool. Go with The Thing, because it has cool practical effects and it's really scary, but it's really well made. Yeah, I mean, I would go with the old school stuff, and like the fun movies. Even the Nightmare on Elm Streets are so awesome because they are so like out of this world and so weird that you can, kind of get a good laugh out of it. And it's not set in a reality. I think that's a lot of fun. And the practical effects, I think, is what's amazing too, because a lot of people nowadays rely so much on CGI. When you can see movies that actually have more practical effects, I think that's better, because they really see the craftsmanship of how movies are made and how much hard work went into these things.
So, you said that you were a fan of film scores. Who is your favorite composer? And do you have a favorite score from them?
I gotta say, I'm such a fan of Hans Zimmer right now. Like, I love all that stuff. I love all the Dark Knight stuff that he did. The Dune score is super cool. I like Alan Silvestri, like all that, like the older movies like that. John Williams, obviously, the Raiders of the Lost Ark stuff. That he's just iconic. It's all those. There's so many I could talk about, because each composer has a different style, and it really depends on what you're kind of like thinking or what you want to get into. I really enjoy John Carpenter's score because he does it himself. And for me, that's kind of another iconic sound, that whole style that he did in his movies. It just depends on the tone of what you want to do, but I would say right now for me, and I just love the Hans Zimmer stuff. I think it's just so cool because he has a mix of electronic stuff and, like listen to the Gladiator soundtrack. How awesome is that? It's so good and powerful. And he just has such a different range of different movie styles, and they're just all different.
So do you prefer working with film or digital?
So I used to be a super digital hater, like, because I started in film. And I was like, I felt like kind of a film snob, 'cause I started as, as not, when I was operating, it was all film, put your eye on the eyepiece and, you had the smell of film when you had to reload, the way it looked, the grain that you would get in certain textures. Digital came and kind of made it feel a little cheap at first. And so you'd be like, oh yeah, this looks like crap. We should shoot this on film, blah, blah, blah. But as technology changes, and as houses can, there's Company 3 or places like that color your films that can add the texture to digital. And also as a director, when you're shooting film, you basically have to go, okay, hey, how was that to the operator? And because they're the ones with the eye on the eyepiece, they know if it's going to be sharp or not, if it's out of focus or whatever, because sometimes low light's hard to tell. And you kind of have to trust who you have working behind the camera. And then you get the dailies like the next day and you watch the dailies. And then the next day, you're already on the next sets, you're already having to do other things. And if you get a scene or some shots that came back soft focus, it was a real bummer. Cut to now with digital, you can go, oh, that was so cool, man. I hope we got that. Okay, can I see playback? Boop. You watch the scene. Oh, yeah. Cool. Oh, it's in focus. Great. Or, oh, it wasn't in focus. We got to go again. So there's a convenience to digital that I think that I've now accepted that I like a lot better. And it's not as much as a risk as shooting film, even though I still think film looks awesome. There's the convenience of digital. And I think that in post, you can make your movies look however you want them. If you have a certain idea of how you want to light it at first, you can always go in post and pretty much tweak it how you want, adding film gray and texture, all that stuff, changing colors. You can do it all.
So you mentioned with effects how a lot of fans prefer practical. Which do you prefer, CGI or practical?
I prefer practical, but I'm not opposed to adding CGI to practical. Mm-hmm. I think that it actually is a good thing to do, because sometimes, for instance, there's things in Studio 666. Everything's practical in Studio 666. But that was also going in shooting certain things that we knew we were going to have to digitally enhance. There's some things in there that we just didn't have the time or the money to create like certain practical creatures, so we would make them. But some things just weren't on there, but we had a practical, it's hard to talk about without being able to tell you what it is, just so you know, but there's so we had other things that were practical that we shot and we would overlay it onto another thing on there. So everything was practical, but some things had to become like a green screen shot to mix into what we had already shot to make it work. So it's a practical CG'd on top of each other to make it work sometimes. But the blood and the gore in the movie, it's full on practical. The things that we did, totally. And that was it. We did everything as practical as possible until you couldn't.
So you've worked on a few zombie movies, including Zombieland, Double Tap. So true or false, the zombies in the movie Heavy Metal are terrifying?
The movie Heavy Metal, like the cartoon?
Mm-hmm.
In the plane? Are you talking about the sequence of the plane? Oh, absolutely horrifying. Like to me, that's one of the best sequences in Heavy Metal, is that whole sequence with the bombers and the zombies come to life. It's so scary. I think those are scary.
So do you prefer
that? Because that cartoon scared me to death as a kid, because talking about things that you shouldn't see, I'm going to go back to what we were talking about. I remember turning HBO on one night as a little kid and seeing a cartoon on late at night. And I was like, what's this? It's a cartoon. Cartoons aren't supposed to be on right now. And the Lochnar comes in and melts the kid's dad at the very beginning. And I'm like totally tripping, like, whoa, what is this? Because in a cartoon, I've never seen anything like that happen. And it was so scary when it approaches the kid and it starts telling the stories and it goes on about all this weird stuff. As like a kid seeing that, it kind of blew my mind, actually. So it's funny you mentioned Heavy Metal.
So do you prefer fast zombies or slow zombies?
Fast. Slow zombies, forget about it. Like Slow zombies are not scary. Fast zombies, scary as hell.
Agreed.
100%. Yeah.
Are there more songs written about love, lust, or heartbreak?
Jeez. Wow, that's a hard question. I think I always go for the darker, so I think heartbreak. But I would probably say there's a lot of almost similar material in each one of those. But I tend to like to hear the songs about people being bummed out about being dumped or things like that. Because I like the darker edge of things. I like when things go dark. Even dark endings of movies make me happy.
So this last question is Sophie's choice. Which would you keep and the other two get killed off? Would you keep Snake Plissken, McCready, or Jack Burton?
Ooh, God. Ooh, I think. Oh, that's so hard. Okay. So I'm gonna go. I hate to say this. This is a question where, like, no matter how I say it, people will be like, "Oh, hell no." Jack Burton, I think, is gone. I think he's killed off. If McCready and Snake Plissken, ooh, that's a hard toss up because they're totally two different kind of characters. But I'm gonna kill off. Oh God, I hate to answer this. I'm gonna kill McCready off because Snake Plissken is such a tough guy. I think we always need him in the corner. I think we always need him. Yeah. So I'm gonna keep Snake Plissken, and he's also one of the first introductions to John Carpenter films. So there's a soft spot in my heart for that character.
So I had such a great time speaking with you. Is there anything you'd hoped I'd asked? Anything you want to add or ask me?
No, I just think that keep on watching horror films, and I think what you're doing is really cool. I think it's really important for especially your generation to really keep horror films alive and keep things going and really show an interest in it, because really this is if you let it be, it's a very fun genre of filmmaking. And I think that as you being 14 years old, I see myself in how you are. And, now you have access to all these cool things like Zoom, and you can talk to people. I never had that kind of access to be able to do that kind of stuff. I just ran around with my buddies and made, my own horror films with VHS cameras and tried to edit with 2 VCRs. It was the worst thing you've ever seen. And you guys have all this technology. So at the age that you are now, you can get into all you want. You can learn how to edit. You can start making your own horror films, and you can make things that look cool because you actually have access to cool cameras. So I say you guys are the next generation, and at such an age, you guys can make it start happening, and really show us old timers how awesome horror films you guys can make, and just show us up. That's what I want to see. I want you guys to show us all up, all us old dudes.
So thank you for sitting down with me. I can't wait to see Studio 666, which comes out on February 25th.
Yep.
It's been really a pleasure.
Yeah. No, thanks for having me. I had a great time. You asked some really good questions that I've been answering. I've been talking to a bunch of press like the last couple of weeks, and your questions have been really fun because they're just totally different. I didn't expect some of these questions, so I had to think.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Zach.